Hello, it's Duncan Nisbet again here for Let's Test. This evening I'm chatting with Rob Sabourin. How are you doing, Rob? You all right?
I'm doing very good, thank you. What time is it where you are?
It is 9 o'clock in the evening.
PM?
Yeah,
Okay, so it's about 3:15 in the afternoon here in Montreal.
nice. And you got a lovely day for it?
Beautiful, a little bit humid, but it's a beautiful July day in Montreal.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. For some reason I seem to be getting hung up on the weather at the beginning of these interviews. I think that's because I'm British.
There you go. The rain follows you everywhere you go.
That's it. It tries. Right, okay, so I first met you at Let's Test 2012, which was obviously the first Let's Test, and there you were doing a keynote and a tutorial. So your keynote was meant to be on triage on the labour ward, but unfortunately Anne couldn't make it. So you changed tack a little bit and went down the elevator parable.
That's right, the elevator parable. It was something I had canned that was on the same topic.
Right, on bug triage.
Bug triage, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a sort of a last minute decision. I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare. And I ran it through Henrik and the guys, and they seemed to think that it was a good fit, so I went with that.
it was great. It didn't come across that it wasn't. It didn't have that long to prepare. It was had lots of media content in it, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, there's. Let me put it this way: I didn't have a lot to prepare for the Let's Test conference, but that was a very well prepared talk. For sure. I've been doing variants of it for over 10 years. It's a very important talk for me. It's a very very critical part of my collection of talks. But I wasn't ready to do a sort of a Let's Test version of it. I sort of took my generic version and ran with that. It was pretty good. It was fun. I think a lot of people gave me very positive feedback and got some interesting lessons from it, which is great. I think there's a lot of important things. The big message in there in that talk is is the relevance of context to the priority and severity of bugs. And it's not just blindly, don't just fix it because you found it, and don't just assume that it's critical because it sounds critical. You have to really weigh the bug in light of all its context factors. And so the elevator parable plays up that a lot.
Yeah, and then you had the bug quadrants as well, which is really fantastic. I took that back actually to the workplace afterwards.
Yeah, you'd never seen that before?
No, never seen it before.
That's beautiful. That's an application, of course, and I can't claim any originality to any of these things, right? You take the quadrants of priority and severity. You take the work of Steve Covey, the tyranny of the urgent, the whole notion about managing priority and severity and applying it. I take that and apply it to bugs, but it's certainly inspired by the work of Steve Covey.
Cool. I'll put a link onto him at the end.
Yeah, I could probably give you a whole bunch of books and stuff, but I love to show people how to make it real. A lot of people come up with beautiful theories and philosophies, but what I try to show with my parables is here's how we can make it real. That's
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
what we found it, or how we found it useful was that because we didn't have like a bug tracking tool as such, if we were working on something and something that came up that we were working on and the feature was still in production, work in production, we use that to kind of assess where it would go in with. So if I take the word bug and I swap that out for another piece of work, we could work out where that piece of work would go. Should it go above some stuff that already been prioritized, or is it okay? Can we bump it down the backlog a bit?
Excellent.
Which is really good, just a quick way of getting to it rather than having a blooming triage meeting for 3 hours.
Well, that's true. Although triage is supposed to be a pretty quick thing. Just if we did the medical talk, you would have seen that people have to make life critical decisions in seconds. You can't spend 3 hours in a triage meeting.
Well, that was the credits to MASH, wasn't it? We then doing
That's right.
triage off the
That's
helicopter.
That's right. You're doing the triage as early as you can. You don't queue up 1,000 bugs and then triage them. You have a few. If you have 1,000, it's not triage anymore. That's something else.
That's it. That's it.
Well, I'm not saying it's not important. It's something else.
Yeah, that's it. Just give it a different name.
Yeah. Well, it's got there's a lot of this today. People use terms like agility around. Light, effective processes. People are agile, and they're able to. When you're agile, generally, what you just think on your feet. You have to be able to make decisions quickly and not have to have heavy bureaucratic processes around it.
Yeah.
So one of the hints I give to people when they sort of talk about large queues of things, saying, "Wow, you're queuing up so many bugs, and then you have so many people debating them. I guess you're making good decisions. I hope you have the right people involved, but maybe you should step back. After the next release, look at what you're doing." and seeing if we can sort of get at least some of those decisions made on the fly as earlier up the chain instead of waiting and queuing them up for a committee to deal with it. And I think by doing that, by getting people to make the decisions more like medical triage, you're probably going to have more timely decision making. People maybe even not injecting as many bugs. In fact, if you're sort of getting the triage earlier in the process, you get the people who sort of cause the problem involved in dealing with it.
But sometimes it's difficult, right? With the decision makers maybe not being in the same floor as the same offices.
It's always challenging to look at the organizational context factors. Who has to okay what, and what is it they're okaying. But the interesting thing, I look at those almost every single time I've looked at a process workflow, and I've been involved in over 90 different life cycles, so it's not just like 5. And you always run into the thing where people say, yeah, we have this sort of bureaucratic process to go through. And I look and say, yeah, you're right. There's sort of people, stakeholders, everyone's interest you got to take into account. But who decides what's a bug that's going to be issued there? Oh, the tester. Oh, really? Okay. So there's actually the decisions made to put the damn thing in the bug tracking system is actually up to your team, right?
Yeah.
So what do you decide to put and not to, well, we just put, well, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Look carefully at what you're doing. Maybe then you should move back and say, what bugs are we looking for? And triage there. Like, it's triage before you even get it as a bug, triage as a test idea, which is where I come to in a lot of my thinking.
Right, okay. We can get on to in a moment, yeah?
Anyhow, so that's intriguing to look at that. And there is bureaucratic context factors, though, and we cannot spit in the face of our stakeholders, right? We have to sort of we have to understand, and I guess that we segue to what they value, right? Or what the value principles are around the project.
Yes, yeah, which is what your 2013 keynote's about, right?
2013, which is, you're talking about coming up in Sydney, right?
That's right, yeah. Tasting, Let's Test.
Yes. So this is always intriguing, these conferences and how they interrelate with each other. This one is, I understand it's only going to be a one-day conference. So it's not quite Let's Test. It's not quite the Swedish one where everybody lock all the testers in a resort up north and kill them one at a time until there's one left. The Agatha Christie testing conference model. The one in Australia, it sounds like actually much more just a traditional testing conference from what I've seen so far.
I think it's a kind of, as it says, a taster to get people interested in the testing conference.
Mm-hmm. So what the coincidence was, of course, that I was down in Australia for 2 other reasons, and I'm doing a peer conference the weekend before and a small consulting gig the week before. So it's a nice coincidence for me that they're going to do this the day I'm there. Although I'm trying to figure out, did they pick that day because I was there? So I'm not 100% sure what side the coincidence is on this thing. I was asked by the organizers to talk a little bit about what is context-driven testing. I think they want to introduce the notion of context-driven testing to the community there.
Right.
So I'm going to be doing a keynote on value sync, and I'm going to incorporate to that a bit of what is context-driven testing all about.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, I don't know if that's fantastic. I guess
it is, isn't it? You put it two together, because obviously without context, how do you know what the value is?
Well, that's a sort of, it's sort of like, I suppose the lesson learned in the value sync is context matters, and here's how. And so there's sort of, I sort of got to give them what the answer is before I give them the graceful segue to the answer. But I'll figure it out. Yeah. It's certainly fun to talk about value and value sync, and I've had this particular talk is something that's evolved a bit over the last 2 years, and it does bring the message, the value of context-driven thinking in software testing and software engineering in general. It brings it out with really concrete examples, which is why I really love it. It's not just a talk where I'm going to talk about the theory of these things. I'm going to share with people at least 4, if I have time, up to 6 or 7 examples from real projects where we basically demonstrate what I call value sync, focusing our testing, focusing our business decision making on synchronizing our values, the values of the team, the values of testers, the values of our stakeholders, the values of our customers, and trying to line those things up to focus our work and deliver a lot of value on a project, because we start understanding what people value. And this helps us eliminate a lot of what I would consider waste and friction. Friction I see in testing projects coming up a lot when people are starting doing what they consider is very good work, and yet no one cares about it. So the stakeholders don't give a damn about the work you're doing, and you're sitting there saying, wow, this is some of the best testing I've done in my life. I'm really doing great work, and how come they're ready to fire me? What's wrong with this picture here?
Yeah.
And the stakeholders, of course, are looking at this results of testing, and they're very, very often totally upset about it. They're saying, well, why are you finding these problems? Why are you complaining about them? Why don't you just fix it and get the thing shipped? And there's a lot of problems, I've seen where testing teams have spent time trying to explain their role in the process. In fact, I've even been hired by companies to try to help explain to stakeholders what testers are actually doing there. And invariably, I run into the situation saying, well, actually, it's quite the opposite, the problem. I mean, if the stakeholders don't understand what you're doing, you got a serious problem. And it's not you talking them up to speed that's going to make a difference. It's you understanding what they value that's going to start making a difference, and then to start working towards a common view of value, instead of sort of forcing something down their throat that they don't understand, saying, well, guess what? They don't have to understand it. You are usually not in the testing business. There's a few exceptions. I know some companies, like, for example, Henrik's company, the House of Test, is a testing company, so they're in the testing business. There's CoreDev in Seattle. They're in the testing business. But very few companies are actually in the testing business. Most companies are in the, I got to get my company running business, or I've got to sell cement business, or I've got to sell product business, and it's not testing. Testing is somehow an evil, hopefully not a necessary evil, that we got to throw a lot of money at before we get the product shipped.
Yeah.
But don't, I'm in the cement business, or I'm something else. So what I try to do is I try to explain to people that it's much more important for you to understand what your stakeholders value, and then see what you can do to help them achieve that value. And if they think of you as an ally towards achieving these values, you're probably going to have a greater chance of success in your projects. And you might also do a lot of different work, or focus on a lot of very different things than you've been focusing on in the past. And this, of course, I can go into many, places with this. You've heard of Dr. Kim Kainer, of course, right?
Of course, yeah.
So he's put together a gorgeous collection of ways to measure coverage of software projects in testing. The notion of coverage is a beautiful notion. A lot of people play with a lot, and there's even been beautiful debates these days about ethics of coverage notions. Michael Bolton has done some interesting stuff on that recently, saying that certain things are unethical. Can you imagine a coverage notion being unethical? And a huge amount of people are debating these things. Well, I love it. I love the fact that people are putting so much energy on that. But you sort of sit back and you look. Dr. Kainer actually identified over what he calls 101 different ways to measure test coverage. He's actually documented, from what I remember, about 110, 115 different ways, different coverage notions. And in that list, I found so many cases where I could pick one coverage notion and say, yeah, from that perspective, my testing is quite thorough, but I can take another coverage notion and said, I haven't even scratched the surface of testing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is exactly the same project, exactly the same testing, exactly the same bugs, exactly the same tools, exactly the same information, exactly the same status report, exactly the same everything. But from one, I'm very thorough, and from another, I'm not even in the right dimension.
Yeah.
And so this is where we get into, is it an ethical debate, or is it a value sync issue? And I think that my stories lean towards value. I lean towards maybe we're testing very thoroughly, but maybe our notions of coverage, our notions of completeness, our notions of things are based on our view of what we think is important. It's a little bit like I was talking to you before about saying that are we biased by design? When we try to understand requirements, are we biased by design?
Yeah.
And in testing, I think we have that bias too. We have a bias for what we think is important. And I start off, when you look at value sync, for some simple notions. Let's take one. I'll pick on one, for example, quality. What is quality? And this is a beautiful thing. The word quality has been used. I can go to the history of the language, but it's been used for a lot of years. It's got a very positive vibe with a lot of people. Quality is important. Quality is very often considered goodness a little bit, but there's been many different definitions over the years. I started collecting them, so I have a collection of quality definitions. It's sort of it'll bear a nice article someday, the collection. But I drilled down to 3 types of quality definitions. So it's not even 3 definitions, 3 types of definitions. And I find them orthogonal and distinct. One definition is one that you'd probably be familiar with if you know the ISO stuff. That would be, or the TQM, Total Quality Movement. Quality is conformance to requirements. I'm sure you've heard that one before.
Yep. So
that's a type of quality definition or a style of quality definition. And then there's another one, which is quality is suitability to purpose, or quality is fitness for use. So conformance to requirements is more or less a Phil Crosby definition, and Joseph Duran, pioneer in quality control systems, a teacher of Deming, if you know Duran's work, he was the guy who said quality is suitability to purpose. Now, suitability to purpose and conformance to requirements are 2 dramatically different views of quality. And quite frankly, that goes down to Dr. Kahner's different coverage notions. If conformance to requirements is important, great, wonderful. That means your job in testing has a lot to do with understanding what the requirements are and discovering them, both implicit and explicit, right? So you're hunting down implicit requirements, but you're basically saying, I want to make sure we help our stakeholders deliver quality by conforming to requirements. Now, if your job is to say, wait a sec, quality is suitability to purpose, totally different definition. Instead of digging your brain out looking for what all these requirements are, just maybe you've got to look at how people use the software to get their job done. And it's not, does our product conform to its requirements? Is, can the user do their job with the software that I'm giving them? And it's a totally different perspective. It's like a total user-centric suiting purpose. How does the user use the software to get their job done? Perspective. And complete coverage of testing from one perspective is very different testing than from another. Both have value. Both could be the right thing to do. But depending on your project context, one might be the way to go or another might be the way to go. And this will lead to different test data, different test cases, different regression notions. All sorts of things will be different. In my talk, I also concretize this. I do 3 different quality definitions, and I give a little baby case studies of each one and how dramatically different the testing focus would be and the impact of testing on the project is depending on the quality view. And now, how many people in testing start off by trying to understand what quality is? And I am not saying go and make a lexicon and write down a perfect definition. I'm saying really, really, really understand what your stakeholders care about and look at that, not just look at written down stuff, but look at past experience. Look at recent decision making they've been doing. Look at the last couple of years of the type of things that they've let go in the field, the type of trade-offs they've had to make, the type of difficult things they've done. What have people done? Like, how far do they go to close an account? How quickly do they respond to problems in the field? All of these things will paint the picture to you about what quality means to your organization. And then once you've got a handle on that, you can sort of work that into how you prioritize and focus your testing. Even how do you get down to the type of transactions you care about, the ways and means of focusing your work, the ways and means of reporting it, and basically what matters to your customer, as opposed from a quality perspective, as opposed to just what matters to your testers or even testers and programmers. And testers and programmers are stakeholders too, but they're not alone. They're not in isolation. So that's one example of value sync, is understanding what quality is.
Well, that's one thing I found is that since asking why more, I've definitely begun to understand the value and helping me to kind of work out what is a bug and what isn't a bug. So rather than just sort of test this, here's some more code, test it, and against requirements or functional spec, whatever, actually asking why am I testing it? And asking, is this the best thing that I could be testing right now? You get some really interesting answers from the people who are requesting those features. I found it's been invaluable.
I'm glad though that you're also talking to the people requesting the features too. That's an important thing too. Some people don't even get to that point. I've even got customers who say that we're not allowed to do that.
Well,
So even though that this is 2013 right now, you still run into testing teams saying we're not allowed to ask people that. So what?
it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, that's one barrier I'm trying to get over at the moment. So I've been 8 months in my new employment, and
Yeah,
getting to speak to the people who are requesting the features is
yeah.
a challenge in itself. And there's some people being promoted who I used to sit next to, so I've kind of built a rapport with them. Now they've been promoted to the people that can now request features. I'm like, so can I ask you then? And they're like, yeah, please do. So it's great. So
Well,
I've got a way in, as it were.
I think that you've also probably been able to demonstrate them how the knowledge that you gain from that can help people get things done quickly, focus on what matters, not waste your time with distractions.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. I just read, for example, a beautiful book. I actually, it's from the chap in India, AJ. He writes these cute little books and he publishes them. And it was on usability testing. And I'm updating my course material on usability testing. So I've got about 4 or 5, new references. I'm reading through them, seeing if there's ideas and stuff. And I look through his sort of checklist and his view of what usability testing is. And I'm looking at that and saying, wait a sec, this is biased by his experience of what people care about. And it's really cool. But I look at that and said, that usability checklist, there's a huge risk if you just give that to someone else and said, here's a usability checklist, use this to test your project. And wait a sec. Wait a sec. That's biased by your experience. Yes, it's an interesting list, but there's whole dimensions of the problem that might not even be in your list that matter. And there's things in the list that, sure, if you go to a stakeholder and said, hey, I'd like to test this, and they might tell you, sure, that's interesting if you find a bug like that, but could they care less? Really, it might not actually, if it's there, the bug's there, it might impede some of their value things, but it's not really related to what they want. So I'm looking at things and saying, there's some sort of, there's got to be techniques of asking why, there's got to be techniques of listening and learning, but we also have to step away. Step away,
Yeah.
and sort of get the sort of notion that, shed our history a little bit. I mean, I always use the word test ideas as opposed to test objectives because I think that you have an interesting test idea, but does it matter? And one of the first things I try to teach people to do with a test idea is to actually punt it, to throw it away, to get rid of it on purpose, though.
Okay.
To purposefully get rid of test ideas, because if it's basically a good idea, but it is not helping to deliver value, or it's out of scope for some reason because of what people are focused on, what matters to them, well then, come up with it, but chuck it. Be prepared to chuck it. And I see so many people get married to their sort of ideas. They get attached to it to the point that they'll quit their job, in fact, in some cases, which is okay, I guess. If you're really out of sync with your customer,
Yeah.
you're in the wrong company. I mean, okay, leave. I guess when your place has, what did you say, 40% unemployment or 25%?
Yeah. In Spain, yeah, southern Spain.
People are not going to leave their jobs easily in a situation like that. You got to sort of focus on what people care about, not what you care about. And that's a little thing also in this. The value sync thing, I'm sort of promoting a little bit of what I would call a servant model. Testing as a servant or as a service to your stakeholders as opposed to driving your stakeholders. And this is a difficult thing right now with a lot of the philosophy coming out of these incredible number of books on what people call test-driven stuff.
Yeah.
Testing driving. And I'm saying testing driving. That's interesting. Testing driving. Yeah. I got that metaphor. Okay, fine. Test driven. I think you mean test first before you write the code. I don't know if that, testing is going to be in charge.
Yeah.
Of driving anything. Like, last thing I want to do is have the testing team tell me what the project goals are. I mean, maybe they should, maybe I'm just not thinking right, but I would think they've got to understand what the goals are and help us see if we're on track. But are we really driving? So I got to be cautious about that. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of literature today that's sort of suggesting that testing is more than perhaps a service. Maybe it's the driver of certain things.
Yeah, I guess you're right there. So yeah, it's driving in that it's come before, but it's not actually the tests that the.
It's a metaphor. Okay, it's a metaphor. It's just a metaphor gone raw. Like I've got all these books. It's incredible. Just with an eye shot, I've got like 6 books. Test driven this, test driven that. It's amazing. And someone wrote a book called Design Driven Development, even just to stop this test driven development. We should design course first. I mean, it's just a metaphor. There's nothing wrong with the metaphor, and it's a good tactical approach to development. I love it. Nothing wrong with it. But I don't think testing is driving, is what I'm trying to say. I think testing is someone who's basically helping us to, show, like James Buck always says, the headlights of a project, right? Show us if we're on track and stuff like that, but not to actually decide what we're doing. And maybe, of course, in some agile contexts, the role of testing becomes the role of requirement generation too. I don't know. It's quite possible that testing gets good ideas of what could be features in projects. Nothing wrong with that.
But yeah, like as you say, it wouldn't be the test team that would be driving those features.
Yeah. So a little bit of what I'm saying when I'm talking about value sync, I'm talking about understanding what people value, and then basically showing how dramatically different our work can be if we respond to that. And in the talk, I also give many, as I said, at least 4, more if I can, concrete case studies in which we look at the value, who values what, and adapt and adjust accordingly, and kick ass. And in fact, in many cases, become heroes. At least 2 cases, the testing team becomes the hero of the company by doing this, by adopting this philosophy.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That'd be good to hear. So I was going to say, I did have a question about what would you say was a great success story of applying value sync?
Yeah, well, the greatest one probably, and of course this is in my practical experience, so there's many more that I know of that I wasn't involved in first person, so I'm only going to talk about the ones I was involved in first person. But I think one of the greatest ones has to be the project which was called the Rendezvous, a medical software project I worked on, in which case we basically had what you would call a death march project. You're familiar with death march projects? Yeah. And this was a very serious one. So I'm in Quebec, Canada. Medical government sort of drives medical stuff here or controls it a bit. We have Medicare, and it's state run in Canada.
Okay.
But doctors still have their own clinics and practices, but it's sort of funded through the government, right? So they basically do their billing through the government. We had acquired a company. I was the director of software engineering at a medical software company called Purkinje. We'd acquired a company with 250 customers doing rendezvous software, clinical scheduling software to help basically coordinate all patients' appointments, radiology appointments, doctor's appointments, all these appointments, right? Lab results and all this stuff. So the coordination software. We had acquired these guys, and as I said, they had over 250 customers. Our software was medical software for diagnostic medicine at the point of care. So this was really cool software to help doing diagnostic medicine, and we were very good at developing it. And I have to say that our testing was extraordinary. I mean, I could talk to you about testing life-critical shit, and it's amazing what we did. However, this scheduling company was an acquisition. I wasn't involved in the acquisition. In fact, I inherited it when I took the job on. And this Death March project started off with government money to basically upgrade the software systems. And all of our customers, in this case 250 customers, took the government grants, which the minimum one was about $5,000, but an individual clinic could get like $40,000 or $50,000 from the government to upgrade the hardware and software to the next generation of technology. Now, of course, they took the money, they got the hardware, and they needed the software by a certain date. If I remember correctly, the date was April, or in April, and when I sort of got involved in the project, it was like in November, before. And if the product wasn't up and running and installed at the clinics by that time, the doctor's money would be clawed back, right? And this means that we would have been basically sued, and we would have lost because we would have really caused harm to these people, and they wouldn't. If they kept the money and didn't have the software, that would have been fraud, because you're taking money from the government for medical purposes and not using it for that purpose, right? So you got to realize this is a real Death March project. Our software had to be up and running and installed by this April timeframe. When I got involved in the project, it was getting nowhere. The team that we'd acquired was working on their own, independent of our regular structures, so they weren't using any of our lifecycle or any of our testers. Our testers tried to help them, but basically the builds we were getting were so unstable and stupid that the testing team couldn't work with them. And testing teams, what I learned is they favor a higher process maturity model, and they were running under a very weak maturity model, which they, I think, thought was agile, but it was actually hack, and it was nothing. When I looked at it, I inherited. So as I said, I inherited this team. I don't want to blame myself for getting there, but it was an awful situation. I determined, and the story takes a while to tell, but I'll give you the nutshell of it. I determined that in fact they didn't have 250 different customers for one piece of software. They had 250 different software for 250 different customers. Every customer had their own private build, and they were operating the company as a consultancy, building them on time and material for changing the software. So every customer had their own installed base of the software, and whenever they wanted to change, they would pay for it on a time and material basis. The customer was delighted. They loved it. Every customer loved it. The developers loved it because they made shitloads of money doing this, but it was not one product for the whole market.
No.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
It was 250 different products. So we basically bought them because they had 250 customers, but we found out that they were a contract engineering company, not a product company. So you got to realize that's a very different model of development. And they were trying to create with a new release where they were basically trying to merge 250 different configurations into one. That's what they're trying to do for the next gen, and using a requirement model. And their view was that quality was conformance to requirements. And so they had to basically make sure that all the features worked. And I can give you many examples of features which one customer wanted that another customer explicitly didn't want. So there were actually contradictory requirements in there.
Yeah.
Where if this feature was there, we want it. If the feature is there, we don't want it, both at the same time. gorgeous problems like that all over the place. And then also tons of features that were added over the years that were punctual ones that people needed for a stupid reason, and then they never used it afterwards.
Yeah.
So there were stupid things like I saw features there about margins around printouts because at one time they got a new printer and they wanted to use a feature of the stupid printer. They added this thing, and then all of a sudden 250 customers needed to worry about margins on printers, which had nothing to do with rendezvous of medical appointments. Like, use crystal reports. What the hell are you doing? All this margins and printer stuff. And they basically had tons of stuff like that. So I have this they were knights in shining armor. They knew how to manage projects. They knew how to manage time and material. The customers really loved them. Of course, the customers, you would love it too. Imagine you had Excel and you called Microsoft every time you needed a feature added.
Yeah.
And Microsoft sent a dozen developers to your place saying, sure, here. And it's fantastic, right? Of course you love that. Of course the customers love that. Anyhow, I had to fix this project. Okay, so how do you fix it? How do you fix it? What really matters? And of course, I basically I ended up taking a deep look at this project, and I really had to do some terrible things. One thing I had to do was to find the manager of this department a new job. As brilliant as he was in his style of management, he was project-oriented, not product-oriented. And he could not wrap himself around the difference between the two. And so I actually helped him get a job in a company that needed someone with project-oriented management with his skills, and he was brilliant at that. But I really had to, unfortunately, replace the management with someone who understood products, not products. In other words, one product for many users, not every user gets every separate thing. Then basically what I did was I basically met and interviewed the actual user community personally. Rob Sabourin, knocking on doors. So there I am. When people are saying, Rob, hire superstar programmers, I say, no, I want to talk to users. What do you mean talk to users? I want to learn what they care about. What do people really need? What's going on here? And I started collecting usage scenarios by interviewing people, and it worked out that the application had, in fact, a complete list, 27 usage scenarios. 27.
Is that all?
Actually, that's all. 27 usage scenarios for this whole thing, for the whole market, for everything. 27 usage scenarios. And they had hundreds of menus and dialogues and controls, but only 27 usage scenarios. Now, this was the mind-blowing difference between requirement-based driven development and usage scenario, suitability to purpose versus conformance to requirements, right? Throw conformance to requirements in the garbage. You don't need that. You need to do the job. You need the doctors to be able to run a clinic. You need people to get well. You need your X-ray at the right place. I don't care what the requirements are. I don't care, if the old Ford used to have a key on the left instead of a key on the right. I have to drive from here to there. That's what matters.
Yeah.
Right? It's not all the requirements. It's what people need to use. So we looked at this deeply. I got permission support from every level of management that I had to make sure that we were in sync. The company, this was Death March. There's lawsuits pending, everything. This was huge issue that had to be dealt with. And on top of that, I couldn't break our existing process because we had good stuff going on with our other products. So I had to be very careful how I managed this. In either case, what I did was I identified those 27 usage scenarios. I then hired from the community of people I interviewed a bunch of subject matter expert testers who didn't know they were testers. They were subject matter experts. They knew this stuff. They knew our product, and they knew how it was used in clinical context. I used my existing testing team to build me beautiful sanitized test data, which we were able to do because they were great at test data, and then we built a beautiful complex test data. I basically hired one expert testing guru consultant who was very context savvy, George Knopfel, a wonderful guy who was basically, I had worked with him since he was a student, so he was a very mature professional by the time I brought him in this project. On a consulting basis, I got the development team focused on product thinking, and basically from the end of November until the end of March, I asked the development team to give me a build every Thursday at 12 noon. And the only thing they were allowed to do was basically address issues, what I call bugs, but address concerns raised by a testing we did, which we did every weekend. So every weekend, George Knopfel and a dozen or so subject matter expert testers, using data from my professional testing team, would basically walk through usage scenarios in a special lab, usage scenarios from our collection with real data, sanitized real data, and basically raise issues. And every issue they found was something that blocked them from doing some usage scenario that mattered. The development team was charged with fixing those issues and not getting distracted by anything else. And between basically November and March, we just did that. And I basically, during that period, worked, by the way, 7 days a week, because the other 5 days a week I was working on all my other projects, right? And plus I had family and all this other shit going on. So it was an amazing period. But we did, by March, we had successfully achieved with what we believe was very reasonable quality, those 27 scenarios. All the other shit was still in the product. We did not try to get rid of it. We weren't able. We didn't want to make any regression risks whatsoever to muck up our scenarios. We worked with the training people to train users to avoid stuff that wasn't in the mainstream, and we came up with a strategy where we would do monthly patch releases to the customers, which progressively removed stuff and added ancillary applications for those few customers who really did need these weird features.
How did you do that? They were desktop.
Yeah, this was desktop, but we did it with helper apps.
Right. Okay.
We just separate programs. It was just, if someone needed something weird, it would be a little program, and we'd grab the data from the database and do whatever they had to do. It was weird, but the cases were funky. They're very. Everyone was weird, but there was like maybe 5 of them, so it wasn't like 2,000, right? So you do 5 helper applications as opposed to generalize something for the whole community.
Yeah.
And most of it was query the database, do some processing, and generate a report type of shit. And yeah, it wasn't too complicated. Excuse my language there for the recording people. So in the end, the project was released. We succeeded, and the company. So this is now, as I said, suitability to purpose. Focus on that as opposed to conformance to requirements. We did it. We got the product out the door, and for the first and only time in my professional career, I was given a cash bonus, which I never had before. And the minute that the check cleared, I quit my job and started my own company.
It gives you the options, right?
And, well, because I had enough cash to go without a paycheck for a while, right?
Yeah.
And also during that project, I wrote the book with my daughter, I'm a Bug.
Yeah.
Because of my family, because I have values too, and I'm a family person, so I would basically bring my kids to work with me on the weekend when I was doing all this Death March stuff, and my daughter would draw bug pictures on the wall, and we turned this into creating a family project of writing a children's book about software testing.
Fantastic, which I'll provide a link to for those people that haven't read it.
So that's I am a bug. So it all fits in. But I just like to show the story that actually testing actually became the hero of this project. And at the beginning, testing was very, very opposed to it, and the testing team was having all sorts of trouble. Like literally, the manager was saying things like, "Well, my team is going to quit if you force us to test this crap," you know. And it's like, why is this crap? Well, it's because there's multiple project teams. And this one is running in a different dimension, right? It's just churning out a software in a way that it wasn't used to. And was it their fault that they were projectized rather than productized? It wasn't because they were bad developers. It was because they were sort of following a method, solving a different class of problems.
Yeah.
And just because you're good at solving one class of problems doesn't mean you can magically take that technical skills and bam, solve another class of problems. It's not always true. And you got to sort of step back and realign everything to get productive development going again, and also to not jeopardize markets that you've built up over years, and conform, as we said. In this case, we had government stuff, penalties, lawsuits, all sorts of things we're watching out for. It's a lot easier to make trade-offs once you're clear about what the product has to do and what people value.
That's it. What the offer.
You don't get into we didn't get caught up into a lot of naive discussions about silly nuanceical bugs. We could tell if an issue was raised that blocked someone from achieving a scenario, no matter what, that was one we had to address.
Fantastic. And I guess they would be the hero as well, because they were working the weekends and putting the hours in, the unsocial hours.
Right, but at the same time, I wasn't burning out too many people with the weekends. I was the guy who did the most work, I think, during this whole project. The team I did bring in were from outside mostly. So George Knopfel was an outside consultant.
Right.
So he was selling his time. So he knew what he was up to. He knew he was selling me those days. The people who were the subject matter expert testers, they had full-time jobs in the domain during the week.
Oh, wow.
So this was extra income for them, and they were happy to do it. I had a pool of many more that I could have drawn on, but I selected the people who I thought was a good cross-section, who were motivated to do it. And the people from my normal testing teams did come in and chip in from time to time because of the data side of it and the platform side of it and the environment side of it, but they didn't all have to work 7 days a week. So there was a lot of work on the weekends, but what happened was the developers gave us the code. Basically, we asked for it on Thursday noon, so we'd have it by Friday at 5, and we basically tested on the weekend, and then on Monday, George was there with the guys, and they did a bug review of the bugs they found. So the developers were just working really a regular week. It was a hard week. It was a very solid week. There were no distractions. They were very busy. Yeah. But they certainly didn't. The developers did not have to hang out on weekends while the testing was going on. They were generally available, but it was mostly coordinated so that external consultants were working on the weekend. And I like that pattern. I like the sort of pattern we had. It was quite a nice weekly tempo going on there. It was a good, a week of work, test, a week of work, test, week of work, test. It worked out pretty good. Although, some people would argue it was imperfect. We got the job done.
Yeah, well, you put them on task, didn't you? And just sort of stop them multitasking.
Well, this is it. Yeah, very focused.
Yeah.
Very focused.
That sounds like a lot of overlap with your other course, the just-in-time testing. So there just seems to be, did Value Sync come out of just-in-time? Should you be doing that a lot longer?
Well, I think that the concepts of just-in-time testing, most of them evolved in my practice, right? So they evolved in my practice. I can date them back to the earliest one would be a practice that goes down to my first commercial release, which was June the 4th, 1982. So certainly the just-in-time stuff comes through in that project. A lot of the thinking I did in that project, a lot of the way we were organizing things was sort of eventually branded as just-in-time testing. I would say if you timed it, my course probably was first released about a year after that project. The earliest stuff I called just-in-time testing, or giving it a name. But that's the sort of experiences that led me to, the just-in-time testing thinking.
Which would you say does include value?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it's a very important part of it. Yeah, it's incredible when you just look at. Did you go to my JIT workshop in Sweden?
Unfortunately, not. No, I missed it.
So in the JIT workshop, there's one exercise, and I don't like giving it away to people. But there's an exercise I do, and it's dramatic how people will even come up with different testing ideas if they have knowledge of different context drivers. So it's like, imagine you take the same testing problem and you look at it from 2 or 3 different contexts. Yep. So if you have the same problem, different contexts, you will come up with dramatically different testing ideas. And so that's why in just-in-time testing, I try to ask people to be very hyper aware of what are the context drivers on the project and actually to hunt them down and to look at them and study them and watch them and monitor them as the project goes on. And they will influence not just how you prioritize and focus your testing, but the type of ideas you come up with.
Yeah.
So context will help focus your testing, but it will also trigger different types of thinking and coming up with testing ideas. I don't want to limit them. I don't want to say that there's ever a bad testing idea, right? Any testing idea is a good testing idea. But if you know what the context is, you're going to come up with different types of testing ideas. And that's what I see. I demonstrate that a lot in my just-in-time testing workshops.
Yeah, because I think Henke and Leo did a workshop similar to that where they had like a testing problem. And then they just like every iteration just give us a different context. And you'd be
Right,
like, oh,
exactly. They did that in a 90-minute framework.
yeah.
And I remember watching that, and I told them, you got to come and see me do it in JIT, because we're making the same point. Yeah, obviously, they did it in a shorter time span, but it's making the exact same point. It's very, very, very important that we figure out all sorts of ways to make that point and to make it real. So if you look at Value Sync, I try to share that type of point with concrete case studies, concrete examples.
Yeah, which is always good, isn't it? Storytelling.
Storytelling, yeah, a little bit of my style.
It's good. It's all good.
Yeah.
Cool. So you're working on Value Sync quite a lot at the moment, and you said it's developed over the past couple of years. Does that mean you've put just-in-time testing to one side, or are they?
No. For me, just-in-time testing is it's a course I do. So it's not the only thing I do. I have if you looked at it percentage-wise, I don't have an exact chart. Like I haven't made a histogram of how much time I'm spending teaching different things. But the just-in-time testing, exploratory testing stuff, in terms of selling direct courses on that, it might be in the 30% range of what I'm doing.
Right.
And the test design side of things, maybe risk analysis type of stuff, maybe another 30%. There's different sides. And then the rest of how it fits into software engineering life cycles, maybe that's the rest. That's the other 30 to 40%. So it's not, I don't compartmentalize it and say, well, just in time I'm putting aside or not. I don't model things the same way as other people do. And if you look at James Bach and Michael Bolton and the rapid testing thing, they basically put so much energy on building up the knowledge base of rapid testing, and the application of that. And it's sort of like, I don't create a methodology like they do. Like rapid testing is something, for me, that's a tool I use. Yeah, sure. It's a tool I use in just-in-time testing for sure. Master it, be good at it. But, talk to James if you want to master that. The thing is that I didn't ever build up a collection like they did. So I don't have the sort of body of knowledge of just-in-time testing. It's a way I sort of frame some of my training. Maybe I should frame more training that way and write books about it and stuff like that. But I didn't put it aside. No, it's part of everything I do.
Yeah. So it's probably quite good. You were at the rapid testing intensive last year.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. So that was good then. Was it a mind meld of ideas?
It was an insane experience, to tell you. It was exhausting.
Was it?
It was awesome though. It was very, very, very encouraging. First of all, encouraging to me. I had a chance to validate a lot of my thinking, and to test live, like for 5 days with, among some of the top people I've ever worked with in my life. So it was awesome. It was a great experience. I must admit, I think I did very well. I tested well, and James put me on a spot. He made me do some teaching and coaching over and above being a student in the course. And then, all day long we're testing. And then in the evenings there were these intensive meetings to discuss, well, what should we do next and stuff like that. So, advancing the projects. But it was really cool. I had a lot of fun. We were testing, for the most part, the eBay auto, what do you call it? The eBay auto site, or eBay buy a car site, whatever, part of eBay relating to the car centers and things like that.
Right, okay.
And it was live. It was live testing. So we were really testing their system.
Oh, fantastic.
With full permission and cooperation of the eBay people. So I was actually on the horn with eBay. I have actually did a lot of great work. It was good testing. I had people in Montreal doing some automation stuff for me. So I had my own little team in Montreal helping me. I was sitting in Orcas Island, and there was about 170 people, I think, online at the same time, all testing different parts of this. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I was reading up on James's blog about trying to pulling all the stats together and the reports. Just sounds insane.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Frankly, I took every single thing I did in that course. I made video recording and audio recordings of it, and I've got BB Flash Express. I've got all the artifacts of it, everything, and I've used some of them myself. to, I basically gave everything to James, and here's all my stuff, But I've used some of it myself. I think that some of my usability testing stuff, I go back to that experience, and I pull videos of the usability test from that. It's really awesome. There's some really nice stuff we did. Nicely framed stuff, that just beautiful examples we can show people, because we can share this stuff, right? It's not just for us that week. It was, mostly for me, it was to have examples I can share with people. So it was pretty awesome, and a good chance to as a test with people who are really good at testing.
That's it. It's getting a good buzz. I know certainly from Let's Test.
It was a good buzz for me. I think that the rapid testing intensive thing is something that for me it's like a sabbatical. I think you have to do that every few years to sort of keep things real.
Yeah.
Let's Test for me is also a very intense experience. When in 2012 when I did that, I could not believe the engagement of the community. We kept at it. Like, it was literally all day, all night, all the time, all testing, nonstop, and every idea was just deep and challenging your thinking. It wasn't just shallow stuff, and it wasn't also just a few people preaching to a few others. It was really everybody was contributing to a fantastic dialogue. And there's so much energy. It's incredible. I did not go to Let's Test this past year. I don't think actually I had the energy left to do it. I told Hendrik at the time, for me it was a sort of every 2-year thing, and I'm glad that they're roping me in next year to help out. I'm involved now with content ownership stuff for next year. We're already, I won't mention names, but we're already setting up the tutorials and the program, and it's looking to be an excellent thing for 2014 in Sweden.
Cool. Yeah, I'm hoping to be there. I'm hoping to get the one in Oz as well next year.
To Oz. Oh, yeah. Well, that's an intriguing thing. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I'd love to be able to go to that too. I'm really, really, really looking for excuses to go to that part of the world. It's sort of hard for me to go that far. But if there's a chance to do, some conferences, some community work there, and figure out a way that it all sort of doesn't bankrupt me, I think it'd be fun.
Be good.
If I had an infinite pool of resources, I'd go to all of these conferences. I just don't think it's very practical. I think I've got to balance it between the bunch. I try to go to CAST. I go to a whole bunch of the professional conferences and the commercial conferences in the States. I try to go to PNSQC sometimes. I love Let's Test. Eurostar once in a while, not too often. Is there anyone that you like to go to that maybe I haven't heard of?
No, basically, Let's Test for me. So basically I started doing conferences last year and started trying to factor into my budget, but I was self-employed then. So it was kind of, I did Let's Test last year and then PSL. And so I couldn't afford another conference. And then so this year I'm now permanent with a company that has a training budget. I just got to convince them that they want to spend it on me going to conferences.
Yeah, so I do a bunch of conferences. Generally, I will have some sort of event where I can have a little bit of revenue before or after the conference, like a course or something, so that the cost of going to the conference is incremental, minor.
Yeah.
But I can see that if you're an independent consultant or a contractor or an employee, it's hard to get in more than 1 or 2 conferences a year. So when I start listing, here's the 6 I went to last year. What? You want?
You're making me slightly jealous.
Well, it's what I do.
And I think CAST is definitely on my list. It's definitely on to-do list.
Yeah, CAST is, of course, CAST is what inspired Let's Test, right?
Yes. So, yeah. Similar school.
Although it's a similar school, similar thinking, testing, different style. Historically, CAST was trying also to have a more academic slant to it, but that's gone now. We're trying to get a lot of papers, like get people to publish papers about testing and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's become a secondary thing at CAST.
Yeah.
Now it's more the context-driven community stuff. And I'm interested in seeing where we go with Let's Test. So I'm very anxious to see how this pans out. This year in Let's Test, for the setup of that, one of the things that Henrik has been very clear about is that people love participative exercises.
Yes.
Like, that was the number one buzz at Let's Test, was all these participative exercises. So what we're trying to do is work a lot of that into the 2014 Let's Test.
Oh, excellent. That's good.
Not just as a side effect of other talks, but as something deliberately. We're asking people to propose exercises, and if we can find enough of them, we might be able to do 8 or 10 sessions which are exercises. Not everyone will go to every one, but you got sort of a whole bunch of exercises going on. Well, we'll see what happens with that. Yeah. People seem to love that part of the Let's Test.
That's it. It's just the people having the chance to get involved rather than just being
Yep.
spoken at.
Yeah. Yep. So anyhow, you wanted to talk about value sync. I give you only one story. I've got, as I said, four to eight of them. I try to share in a keynote style. I also teach them in another style, which is something called testing under pressure.
Okay.
And testing under pressure is a one-day workshop where I tell five stories. So I break down this value sync thing into five principles, and each principle I have a story, and I tell it like around a campfire, five stories. And so that's testing under pressure. If you ever take a look, if you Google testing under pressure,
Yep.
I have an article on that subject. I've got online virtual courses on that subject, and I've got live courses on that subject. And mostly it's in the States, of course, that I'm doing this.
Cool. Well, I'll put a link up to that on the site.
Yeah, so it's basically you take what I'm going to be doing in that keynote, and then you stretch it over a day, so you let people really absorb it more and get a lot more discussion about it going on. But that's not my favorite style of instruction either, because storytelling is great, but people learn more from participative exercises, in my experience. So, it's there because of demand, not because it's the best way to teach it. It's
But
sort of there's demand for that format.
it is great hearing other people's experiences.
Yeah, it
Just
is. It is.
yeah.
Just that sometimes people take the course though, and I'll give you an example of feedback I get. And I love the story, blah blah blah, but what's happening? Rob's showing off for a day. So well, that's what you. It's true. I am. I'm telling you four stories, but it's not the point of them is not to show off. The point of them is to encourage you and motivate you, and to show you how things are real. And I've got to be very cautious because some people come to these courses and they're expecting some sort of generic cookbook
Yeah.
as to how do you do this. And well, here's how I did it. Here's how this factor influenced what I did. Here's how it might influence you. But this is not necessarily saying I don't really want to tell you this is what you should do every time.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a best
Yes.
practice.
Not quite, yeah. It's what I've come to start using the term though. I got a nice new one. I call it awesome practices. I don't want to tell you any best practices, but let me share with you some awesome practices I've done in the past.
That's it. That worked for me.
There you go.
Cool. Okay.
It's
So,
fun.
so that's covered like let's test and value sync and a little few sneak peeks into your keynote for
Yeah,
today.
yeah. I'm gonna have a lot of fun at that.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do? You're gonna take this and sort of put some text together, or
Yeah.
clip a
So
few audio sentences together, or what are you gonna do?
I'm going to put it up on YouTube. I'll put some links to the some of the references that we've mentioned in the talk in the chat
All right. I do have a link somewhere to the actual talk that PNSQC put online.
for value sync.
Yes, well, it's a version of it, an older version of it.
Yeah, I was watching it today.
Oh, you saw that.
Yeah, so I'm going to put it up.
So you heard my story.
I heard some of it. Yeah, I got as far as
Okay.
campfire.
Okay. So I don't make me sound redundant.
That's good.
Anyhow, have fun with it. Anything I can do to help, you're not going to be done in Australia then?
Not this year, maybe next year.